Thank you. Can you have it any way you want it? What about what other people want and when they want it the way that they want it? Sometimes that's not a big deal. Sometimes we can sort of work it out and just figure out, well, okay, I sort of want this like in that sketch, like the turtle and the shark. We can figure out, well, here's how we're going to sort this thing out. But what about those other times where it's not so easy? Yeah, you know that feeling. When it's not so easy and we get those hard conversations about money, about sex, about who's in charge, those are the difficult times. And you know that feeling in your body. Well, if we can rewind in my life 5 years ago, and I was in a very deep business partnership with a dear friend. And this was not always the easiest person to have a difficult conversation with. I tried. I mean, I like to resolve things, but I'd bring things up and they just would not go so well. And so I thought, well, I'll just put that in this box over here. I'll just deal with that on my own because we're getting along in all these other ways. And so can I just relegate this to the thing that I just put over here? You see where this is going, right? And at the same time, I was married. And one of the things I was happiest about in my relationship was that we never fought. That also did not work out so well. So when both of those relationships fell apart, I made it my business to delve into what it was about me or what it was that I was doing to contribute to those situations where those relationships didn't work out. And being a psychotherapist and a personal growth junkie, I figured, I'll just get in there and really figure it out. And what I found was even though I'm an extrovert, and even though I make a lot of my private life, I share a lot of it and I bring it out into the public, there were those certain topics that I was scared of, that I was avoiding. So I made it my business to never avoid a difficult conversation again. And that led to the focus of my business and the book that I just put out last year. And I'm going to share with you 3 of the secrets from that book, 3 secrets to leading a difficult conversation like a master. The first one is to get honest about the real issue. Because I like to say, if you're having a conversation, a difficult issue with like a work colleague, an office mate, or even your spouse, and what you're arguing about is who takes out the trash, right? And this is the kind of stuff we argue about. It's these little petty things, but they become these big deals. It's because it's not about the trash. It's never about the trash. It's about what's underneath it. It's about what your fear is underneath that. Do I belong? Am I loved? Who's in charge? Do I feel like I'm not being respected the way I was in my family years ago? Do I feel invisible? Do I feel not listened to? That's the monster that's chasing you. Because let's be honest, if it was just about the trash, well, when you live by yourself or when you have just your own office, you take the trash out every day. It's really not that big a deal. So it's about what's chasing you underneath that. When you figure that out, then you have a place from which you can have a conversation about what matters. The second secret is to get resourced. So right now, for all of you sitting in your chairs, as you think about a difficult conversation that you've had in the past, or maybe one that you're kind of dreading having, one that you've gone over and over in your head, how's that going to play out? Or you've brainstormed what's the worst case scenario over and over. You're kind of making yourself sick about it. Can you feel it in your body right now? Do you know what I'm talking about? It's not just me, right? Okay. So I want you to imagine that I'm going to bring that person onto the stage right now. And you're going to have that conversation. Do you feel that in your body? How do you feel about having to confront that person? Probably not great. Probably if you're like people I've talked to, you have your stomach up in knots, your throat might feel constricted, right? You might feel lightheaded, your palms get sweaty, you get jittery. So I want you to try something with me. I want to get you resourced. If you would sit up straight in your chair, put your feet on the floor. I know you got all your note-taking things, but what we feel in the body is going to be so much more important than writing it down. Sit up straight, your head on the top of your spine. And I want you to press your legs, not hard, but with some pressure. Press your hands into your legs and feel your physical capability. Notice that you are much more powerful in your body than a time where you actually were dealing with that fear. These fears usually come from childhood. When you sit like this, how do you feel about having that hard talk? I'm guessing better. And sometimes we're on the phone, or sometimes it's something where we're in person standing up. So for those who want to play along, I invite you to stand up. Really. It's theater. Okay, so now they're going to come in and you're just sort of standing there and you might feel how you feel. But now I want you to do a bit more of the superhero pose, like you see on the slide there. Hands on your hips, spine straight, feet flat on the floor. Feels very different, doesn't it? Exactly. Much more resourced, much more powerful. You are able to walk away, you're able to take a step forward and confront something. Okay, thank you. That's the second secret. The third secret is to figure out what your goal is. This is often a game changer. Once you're resourced, what is it that you need to accomplish? You know what the fear is. You know what the real issue is. What's the goal of this conversation that you want to have? And I've identified that there are 3 types of goals: connection, negotiation, and protection. An example of a connection goal is my client, Mary, and her husband. They've been married for 20 years. They're very happy, by all accounts, 2 kids, pets. You know, they've been living very happily together for a long time, and they really like and love each other. But they were having a conflict about whether or not to get a dog, which doesn't, again, it's sort of like, it's about the trash, right? They were having a conflict about whether or not to get a dog. It was actually a second dog. And they just could not see eye to eye about it. And when I was working with Mary, she was really worked up about it. And so when we figured out that the actual thing had to do with her feeling safe at home, we realized that her goal needed to be about connection, because her husband was not an abusive person. He's not an uncaring person. He cares a lot about how she feels. They'd just been missing each other because he thought she just wanted another pet when what she wanted was to feel safe at home. So her goal for that conversation was connection. Dear, let me explain to you why this is so important to me. I don't think you've understood, and I want us to come together about this. The second type of goal, negotiation, can be seen in an example of one of my colleagues, Brett, who was doing a freelance consult with or a freelance job with another colleague for that colleague's client. And they'd made a verbal agreement about how it was going to go down. And after spending about double the amount of hours that he'd meant to, because there was a miscommunication with the client, the third party, he realized he needed to have a difficult conversation and say, look, I know you've shown up for me in the past. This is, you've really delivered for me, but this is no longer working out. Here's what I'm willing to do, and here's what I'm not willing to do. And this is a negotiation because, sure, you want some connection and you want to be able to step in for your boundaries, but you're presuming that the other person has positive regard for your needs and feelings. They care about how you feel, but it's a little bit less passionate than a connection conversation. It's someone that you're not quite as intimate with. But you're assuming that they're willing to come to agreement with you if you just get clear that this is about seeing how we can compromise, seeing what's working for you and seeing what's working for me. The third type of conversation is protection. And an example of that comes from when I was working through my own system that I describe in the book. I was getting really triggered at times about talking a lot on Facebook, because I share a lot on Facebook. And I would set out really share really interesting things about what I think and what I feel. And I was sometimes having people come on, those trolls that come on and say, well, you just think you know this, or that's not how that works. And it really would trigger me because I had to really delve in there and figure out what was my fear, what was the real issue. And it was that I was feeling shut down. I didn't feel like this was actually a conversation they wanted to have for negotiation purposes. This was actually them saying, Rachel, I'm going to win. I'm going to win this argument. And that wasn't okay with me. So I realized I needed to have a conversation about protection. I needed to step in from my boundaries and say, look, this is the way that it's going to go. Either you agree with me and you agree to have this conversation in this way, you agree to an open exchange of ideas where you're not just trying to tell me that I'm wrong, but you're actually maybe willing to learn together. You might be wrong, you might learn something, I might learn something, or you're not. And if you're not, bye-bye. That's what the block button is for. So that's an example of a protection conversation. You can actually have these different conversations. You can have different goals that shift over time: connection, negotiation, protection. But you have to have a primary, and you have to know it ahead of time. That's the biggest secret about all of this. If you don't plan this difficult conversation ahead of time, you're not going to be able to do it in the moment because you're going to get confronted by what I call inner panic. We call it the fight or flight response, right? The thing you were experiencing in your chair earlier of like, ah. The thing that combats the fight or flight is to plan ahead. So these are just 3 of the secrets that I talk about in the book. And what I've come to learn is that difficult conversations are imperative for personal and relational health. I know that dealing with anger and with hurt feelings is not easy. It's not simple. I wrote a whole book about it. But here's what I want you to remember. Going over and over and obsessing about how the conversation's going to go in your head, that's not a strategy. And considering worst-case scenarios is not a plan. Neither is avoiding it in the myriad of ways that we can avoid it. And there's a flyer that you can pick up from the speaker's table about the 6 ways that we tend to avoid conflict. None of those ultimately are effective. None of those make you feel the way you felt in the superhero pose: powerful, capable, able to get what you want. But if you get real about the issue, if you get resourced, and you figure out your goal, you can go into that difficult conversation, and you can have it any way you want it. Thank you.